Welcome to an alphabet of fairy and the letter U. In this snippet of folklore, we are going to take a look at the Orisk, the unicorn, and the Undine. The Orisk is a larger half-man, half-goat creature found in the Highlands of Scotland in Gaelic folklore. Indeed, Gaelic Orisk translates as someone who can foretell the future, or a savage-looking fellow. He is related to the brownies of tradition, but hairier, rough-looking, a little lazy, but still happy when churning butter and cleaning around the household and farms. And he is very harmless. Every clan manor had its own Orisk, and a chair would be placed in the kitchen by the hearth for him to use should he visit. And as other household spirits, he must never ever be left clothes as an offering. The Orisk has a deep love of all dairy products, and it was the bane of dairymaids, and yet for the household to have a resident Orisk was considered very lucky indeed. He is a lonely fellow, craving human companionship and yet being quite frightening to look at, never really being befriended by them. He would wander lonely places such as a wild place close by Loch Katrine, only meeting with other Orisks at certain important points of the calendar. He is basically more solitary than other household fairy folk, visiting the dwellings, but choosing still to make his home in the wilderness. They were said to be the children of fairy women and human men, children of the Lian and She, of whom I dedicated an episode on the channel. Orisk were usually seen sat upon the rocks of moorlands and mountainsides, watching carefully lonely travellers as they passed through his land. Sometimes he would speak to the traveller or give them a beating, but more often than not he would simply watch quietly, and very often would help the wanderer who was lost or late on his way home. There are many tales of Orisk that well describe their nature and behaviour, some of which I will tell here, and often you can't help but feel very sorry for this strange fairy creature and its bullying at the hands of human men. Once there was a miller who over time became exasperated. His mill machinery kept being broken overnight, a consequence of the mill running strangely overnight but with nothing to grind. One of the other men of the mill decided to sit and watch quietly through the night time to see what on earth was going on, who was the cause of this mischief. He set a nice fire to keep himself warm. Sleep soon overcame the man though, and he dozed until around midnight when upon opening his eyes he saw to his horror in front of him the strangest looking creature. Pulling himself together, he asked who the stranger was, and the reply came, "Orisk." The Orisk asked the man his name. "Myself," came the reply from the human. In front of the warm fire, the Orisk soon fell asleep, and the miller's worker shovelled a pan of ashes onto the creature's lap. The Orisk leapt to his feet in pain, screaming, and from outside other Orisk voices shouted what on earth was the matter. "He set me on fire," shouted the Orisk. "Who?" came the response. "Myself," the Orisk shouted back. "Then put yourself out," the fellow Orisks yelled back. An Orisk from the Yellow Waterfall at Glenmaley in Inverness-shire would visit a home every night to sit and watch a woman called Mary as she wound her thread on her distaff. And never did he speak a sound or a word. He simply loved to watch the lady as she worked. One of the household men wanted to see what this fairy creature looked like, and so he stole Mary's clothes and put on Mary's clothes and hunched over on her seat, beginning to twirl the distaff. He was useless at it, but had confidence that the creature would not notice that he was an impostor. As time went on, he noticed a strange figure at the door, and yet it would not come into the room. Instead, he simply heard, "I see your eye, I see your nose, I see your great broad beard, and though you will work the distaff, I know you are a man." I think everyone knows the image of a unicorn, and rightly so. They have been part of our folklore since roughly 2000 BC, and they appear in folklore and mythology around the world. A single-horned creature, majestic, mystical, and inspiring. Despite its antiquity and international imagery, the most often seen unicorn in popular culture today is the European classic unicorn, white, quite horse-like. From its forehead grows a long spiralling horn. It has cloven hooves and is often bearded. This is the unicorn that we will focus on here, a symbol of purity and perfection, a woodland dweller, and only able to be held captive by a virginal young woman. The medieval era established the image and folklore of the European unicorn. Tapestries and illuminated manuscripts show beautiful images of the beasts with gentle ladies, both quietly resting, captive and submissive to the purity of the virgin that it has allowed to take it. Of course, the folklore became entwined allegorically with Christian folklore, the unicorn's purity, the virgin young woman, the hunting, suffering and sacrifice of the unicorn, mirroring that of the Virgin Mary, Christ and the crucifixion. And so the unicorn became popular and established in culture very easily. Unicorn horn was said to be formed from a substance called alicorn, which was full of magic and medicine. If caught, the unicorn's horn would be cut and the horn ground to a powder and added to water to be used as a preventative of poison and to heal illnesses. Very often narwhal were killed and their tusks sold as unicorn horns, and this fraud was known even way back in history. It's even mentioned in the 1600s. And so, in a time of magical medicinal practices, the horns of various animals would be ground and sold as alicorn up to around the mid-1700s. Walrus and elephant ivory was carved into cups and gifts for royalty, preventing poisonings apparently. But then as they weren't unicorn horn, they wouldn't have worked at all. In one of his notebooks, Leonardo da Vinci wrote, "The unicorn, through its intemperance and not knowing how to control itself, for the love it bears to fair maidens, forgets its ferocity and wildness, and laying aside all fear, it will go up to a seated damsel and go to sleep in her lap, and thus the hunters take it." Some of the most beautiful tapestries of the late European Gothic era are the Hunt of the Unicorn series. These are 7 tapestries involving wealthy nobles hunting among a garden setting and buildings. A maiden helps to trap the unicorn, which they then kill and take back to their castle. The final tapestry in the series shows the unicorn is not actually dead, but with the maiden, in a garden surrounded by a little fence, with flowers, trees and other animals. It is also a creature often used in heraldry, gracing the shields of many noble families, and is one of 2 animals symbolic of the United Kingdom, the other being the lion, and they represent the opposites that must both exist for balance. As a cultural icon, the unicorn is present in literature, film, poetry, and as a social icon has become one of the most potent symbols of wonder, innocence, equality, hope, and magic. Undines are water elemental creatures, whose origin comes from the alchemical writings of Paracelsus, where each element had a particular elemental being. As time passed, the Undine became associated with mermaids and water nymphs, female in look, water being a female element. They can be found in woodland waters, waterfalls, and the seas and oceans, and are known for their beautiful and entrancing singing voices. Hans Christian Andersen, when writing The Little Mermaid in 1837, and Fouquet's novella, established the modern image of Undine as a name of a particular water fairy itself. Undines are beautiful and entrancing, and yet they have no souls. For a human man to capture and captivate one and then marry the Undine will earn a human soul. But this comes with a cost, as their lives will be brutally short. Children born from these unions will always have a human soul, but will also always have some sort of characteristic that ties them to water, such as basic gills. It was Fouquet who brought us one of the most recognisable and most popular images of Undine. His books sold internationally and inspired many other artistic works. In his version of the tale of Undine, she is a royal spirit of the waters, but raised by a poor fisherman and his wife. The couple had a child of their own, a daughter named Bertalda, and yet she tragically was lost on her 3rd birthday when by the Danube River was believed drowned. A few days after the loss of their daughter, a child appeared at their door, and in their grief and longing they took in the child to raise as their own. The child lived with them and grew, and she was so very beautiful, and yet something about her was strange and wild and immature and careless. On her 18th birthday a stranger appeared at the cottage door, and this was a knight, injured and needing shelter from the approaching storm. His name was Huldbrand. The storm raged for many days, and over this time the inevitable happened. Huldbrand and Undine fell in love with each other. As the storm began to end, it would soon be time to part, and the knight to return home to his castle. And yet he had something important to do. He asked the old couple for permission to marry their daughter. Delighted, they agreed, and now another strange thing happened. Because another visitor arrived at the door, sheltering from the storm, and this was a priest. And so, of course, the priest was asked to marry the young couple. As soon as she was married, Undine gained a human soul, along with her husband. Finally the storm ended, and Huldbrand and Undine left for his castle. What nobody involved had known, though, was that Huldbrand already had a lover at his castle, and this lady was called Bertalda. In fact, she was the same Bertalda who as a child had been lost in the Danube. She had not been killed, but had actually been kidnapped by a water spirit, so that Undine could take her place with the older couple. Bertalda had been found by the Duke and Duchess of the area and raised by them as their own child. Bertalda and Huldbrand had fallen in love, and their affair did not stop him, even when he returned with his new bride Undine. Strangely, all three lived together at the castle. And of course this does not bode well for anyone. The marriage collapsed into a million pieces, and heartbroken Undine left to return to her home beneath the waters of the Danube. It did take some time for Huldbrand to realise his love for her, and how much he missed Undine, even with the arms and the charms of Bertalda. He pined for her, and longed to see Undine again. He came to the waters of the Danube where she had slipped beneath, and back into that realm below the water. And there she was. She rose from the water to meet him. The story ends when Undine kisses Huldbrand, and the kiss is fatal. The faithless Huldbrand dies. Thank you, subscribers and supporters, for all your kind words, views, likes and follows. Some people have asked me how they can support the channel. Well, there are a few ways now. You can look at our merchandise shops where we have all sorts of great things with mine and Marc's art. And now you can even buy me a coffee on Ko-fi, where you can also join as a member of my page and get great principles of Marc's art and folklore things every month as a thank you from us both. I have put all of the links in the description of this episode. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Alphabet of Fairies. We are nearing the end, and I still have a few letters to go. However, until next time, dear friends, take care, brightest of blessings, and remember, please don't play with the fairy folk, or you may just end up in one of my folk tales yourself.